Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I hope everyone had a nice holiday. I'm back today to talk about some of the updated teams for Guild War Offense. I recognise that people are at different stages of the game, so for each composition I have highlighted the core characters in black as well as the flex slots in white. I'll highlight the important abilities to level as well as the key concepts for gameplay. Even if you can't field the exact team, hopefully this still gives you some ideas or synergies that you might not have thought of previously. Before we dive into the teams, a couple of things to get out of the way. In other mobile games with this sort of player versus AI concept, there have been so-called hard counters to tease out. The combat mechanics in Tacticus are different, and I haven't found the same to be true here. Combat generally goes one of two ways. Either you have a really high damage or burst centric team, which ends the battle in 1 or 2 turns, or it becomes a slow 5 to 6 turn battle where you are constantly healing and abusing your summons to whittle down the enemy. We already know that summons and by extension summoners are worth their weight in gold for this game mode, largely because the enemy AI targets those summons preferentially, so I won't labour that point. It's also important to note that maps play a huge role in the success or failure of an attack. Maps are randomly assigned to buildings each war. The map that you face for the HQ will almost certainly be different from war to war. Open maps tend to be easier to navigate, while maps like this one are a nightmare where you are funneled into a choke point against enemy high ground and Vox station fire. Team optimization gives you the best chance for success. The teams that I'm showing you today regularly help me get 10 wins out of 10, as shown here in a recent war against Bloody Rose. These are all attacks against double Medicae and several defensively buffed buildings, so I've put the testing in before bringing these teams to you. Up first, we have to start with the Tau. The Tau team is pretty good, really just abusing the fact that the enemies will run joyfully into Rayvas's active without regard. Against double Medicae buffed buildings, Rayvas's active will not be enough damage on its own to one-shot multiple characters, so you have to put Shadow Sun adjacent to Rayvas for the damage boost. In a perfect world, you also position Eldryon to get a Doom bonus on attackers too. After that, Sho does a lot of damage with his drones, Eldryon and Shadow Sun work as buffers for the ranged hits of Rayvas and Burchard. Brother Burchard can also be placed in the front to tank for an otherwise fragile composition. The Orks are probably the strongest single faction in the game now, and they really come together courtesy of Boss Gulgorts and his Wag. Lots of damage, lots of movement, and some summons too. The team is pretty much perfect for Guild War. It does struggle a little bit against Overwatch teams, so it's worth bearing that in mind. I like Aethana in the 5th slot over Tank Smasher. She can benefit well from Gulgorts' Wa to become a range 6 flying unit with high damage output, and then she continues to provide a reasonable damage aura for the rest of the fight. This team probably needs no introduction. The mechanical team dominates guild raids, and the multiple summons created through Tangita are really good here too. Exeter Row can help you chew through particularly tough enemies, and the Necrons in the flex slots add more summons. In this clip against Bloody Rose, you can see how things actually go pretty badly for me in this fight. Ragnar chain blocks several attacks and I lose almost my entire team to Calgar. Karn then chain blocks several attacks on the next turn, but the core duo of Tangita and Actus are enough to see the battle through. I've really been enjoying the Genestealer cults in Guild War, and I think that their inter-faction synergy is really off the charts. They make lots of summons, revive through their ambush mechanic, and are a real pain for the AI to deal with. The cherry on top is the Pattermind's Genestealers, created through his active. Unfortunately, the damage on the active isn't enough to kill enemies outright. Getting a good setup with some area of effect damage using characters like Calgar and Sarkoel can set you up for easy victories. Another oldie but goodie, the Psyker team uses Abraxas and Yazagor to set up chains of summons that overwhelm the enemy and cause havoc. The team can sometimes struggle a little with Overwatch, so I have seen Sybil used in one of the flex slots to good effect. This team really centers around Ascor being able to taunt multiple enemies at once. It is most effective against units with a weak melee attack, or where you can't afford the enemy to use their abilities. Corodius gives Ascor 1 bonus movement with his passive, and that really lets you get the most out of Ascor's taunt. The rest of the team is pretty flexible. I've chosen Chaos units in my flex slots as they also benefit from Corodius' bonus movement aura. In this clip you can see how the gameplay plays out. I really don't want to be fighting against a Tyranid warrior or taking high damage Psyker attacks from the Neurothrope. I set up in a way that all of the Tyranids get taunted by Ascor. The rest of my force now has time to deal with the enemies on the left before we turn our attentions back to the Nids. Rotbone heals Ascor up, and then the overlapping Deathguard and Karn are too much for our foe. The addition of the Parasite of Mortrex has really pushed the Tyranid team to another level. You get loads of summons through the Winged Prime and the Parasite, and the Ripper Swarms and Tyranid Warrior are reasonably durable. The Neurothrope stays at the back and adds a lot of psychic damage to kill enemies off. This team struggles against Overwatch and can also sometimes lack damage, as the Neurothrope is the only real damage dealer. Thaddeus works well in a flex slot for those reasons. I'm going to largely skip over this team. Ragnar and Onshi are too powerful to be friends, and that Warhowl combo means that you can bring basically any 3 other melee characters and do well. Tiark is nice for manipulating enemy positions, and Jane Czar is another way of shutting off Overwatch. The next 2 teams play off the Act of Faith faction trait for the Adepta Sororitas. The basic idea with this team is that the enemy will try and kill off your summons, whether those are from Bellator, Matineo, or Celestine. These summons then add Act of Faith stacks to Celestine, who starts slaughtering enemies. Isabella's active can bring those Imperial summons back to life, and due to the rework, both Isabella and Roswitha also gain stacks of Active Faith, and that lets them one-shot enemies too. This team has a lot of reach and movement, and I like using them against teams with show or difficult maps with choke points. Finally, we have a pretty similar concept for Team 10, but with Guardsmen instead of Flyers. The payoff here is Morven Val, who has an area of effect attack that lets you crit multiple units at once. I've paired some Black Templars here as they are pretty good at disrupting enemies and dealing damage with their own kits. Right, those are the teams. Hopefully some of you found that useful. I've left a time-limited code here on screen to celebrate hitting 17,000 subscribers on my channel. Feel free to hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, and we can celebrate with more codes in the future. Thanks as always to my Patreons who support me and give me the platform to continue doing this sort of work. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!